Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me okay? Is this too loud? I'll do a little mic check real quick. Hi, everyone on the live stream. All right, I'm Brandon. I'm from Merit Circle. Merit Circle is a DAO focused on gaming and that Web3 crossover, that ecosystem. We have a very strong belief in the future of this, but let's get into the talk. So how to end this civil war. So GameFi and gameplay are just generally at odds with each other. This idea of a speculator and a gamer being one mindset in the future, or even one mindset right now, is just kind of wrong in my mind. This is why gamers typically hate NFTs in their games, which we always talk about. It gives a pay-to-play mechanic to the game that people just don't want. You know, games should be fun. We always say, focus on the gameplay, focus on the gameplay. But grinding in a game can be fun, especially when you look at it from the outside looking in. There's a very subtle difference between grinding it out for some sweet loot in a game or grinding it out for money in a game. I bet most people here probably love their jobs. This is a really fun space to work in. I love my job, but it's really important to point out that if you didn't get paid for your job, would you still show up to do it? You might do that for family, but I don't know if you would do that for work. And that is the subtle difference between grinding it out for fun versus grinding it out for money. It's worth pointing out that no gamer cares what backend you use today or in the future. We keep talking about abstracting all this stuff away. We're already abstracting it away. We have, maybe you're using Postgres or NoSQL. It doesn't matter to the gamer. They don't care. But it does matter to the game developers. There's a certain affordability over time that you have to consider when you're using a chain. It's really about a cost of a database right. Let's just keep it simple. If you're using AWS or a different cloud provider like Google Cloud Platform, you have a very fixed and predictable cost for every database write that you do. If you decide to use a blockchain for your database, every write has now a variable and unpredictable cost. And there's ways to mitigate that with this noisy neighbor problem. We'll talk about that. But overall, you're just going to have that variable cost. So you have to decide, is this going to drive revenue? Am I going to put all of my transactions on chain just for the sake of having transactions on chain? Probably not. It's probably going to cost you a ton of money. Will it hurt or help gameplay? This is the gameplay question over and over. It can't be a cash grab. If you are minting stuff ahead of time, it might look like a cash grab. It really has to drive the value of gameplay itself. It can't just be the side thing. So let's talk about a few different game types before we keep going. So open world games, we have like Final Fantasy, Grand Theft Auto Online, and Rust. These are largely about inventory management, right? It's like economics in the game itself, and sometimes you're switching, I don't know, like 5 iron ore for 1 iron ingot. That adds some complexity to swaps in the game. Not all items affect gameplay, which is why most people focus on skins and cosmetics, because it doesn't really feel like it's pay to play, and it's an easy thing to do. We do this already. CSGO does this already. You know, off-chain, it's fine, it works. What's interesting, though, is that there are different game styles and game designs you can do that might fit the Web3 ecosystem a little bit better. I mentioned Rust here, even though it's not a Web3 game, because every month or I should say at a set interval it changes, they wipe the server, meaning all of your inventory, all the stuff you have built in this server just goes away. But what you do get to keep as a player are the blueprints. So if you have a clan of people, after a server wipe, it takes about on the order of hours to days to sort of rebuild everything you had. And that's an interesting game design. Maybe they could make blueprints NFTs. Maybe they could make other aspects, instead of a blueprint, the actual building an NFT. So instead of building it, you just drop it in after a server wipe. I'm just spitballing. The point is that the game has been designed differently, and maybe it's about designing the game a little bit differently to adhere to some of these standards. Maybe. A card game, a popular one, Magic the Gathering, created by Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro. It's been around forever. There's been an online version for over 21 years, which when I looked that up, that kind of blew my mind. They do a good job of balancing the mechanics of the game. They have many formats of the game. The most popular one is probably called Standard, and that's their tournament play. And those cards exist in Standard for 1.5 years, and then they roll out and exist in the other formats. However, when they release a card that is way too powerful for that format, they will ban it. They will ban it without any apology whatsoever. So if you have built a deck around this particular card and all the other cards in it revolve around it, well, you just have to go back to the drawing board, and that kind of stinks. So EVE Online has been mentioned at other talks here. It's worth pointing out that, actually, first, CCP, not the Chinese Communist Party. They built this large space battle game. There's times of war, there's times of peace. There's a lot of money that goes into the game by people spending money on what is called ISK, which is their in-game currency. It's a very deep and dense economics for this game, and it's because they designed the game after the NASDAQ. It's actually pretty impressive. What's interesting, though, is that they still jump in when they need to push levers and turn knobs to make sure that scarcity is where it should be. Supply and demand is balanced as it should be. That's very difficult to do, but they do that, and they can do that easily because it is off-chain. They announced at the Game Developers Conference that they are going to they're going to create a different game. There's a $40 million investment there that will be an on-chain game. It's just interesting to point it out because why didn't they do that with EVE Online? It's already a successful game. It's really hard to do that with an current successful game to sort of bring those mechanics to Web3 and have it not affect the game in a big way. So we talk about patches. I'm actually going to sip of water. I get real nervous doing these things. All right. So patches, these updates to games. It's really easy to say, and I do know this is sort of an old school mindset of like, it's free to play, who cares, I don't care if I break the game on my players, it's free. Why would they complain? Anecdote, if you don't know, the inspiration for Ethereum was when Vitalik Buterin was playing Warcraft back in the late 2000s. He had this warlock character and this spell that sort of revolved around everything he did. Well, Blizzard just came in, no announcement, changed that spell, and made him realize, wow, what horrors centralized services can bring. And so he decided to quit Warcraft. Then he went on a tour for 3 years to figure out what's going on in crypto, and then invented Ethereum, a general-purpose blockchain that was more general-purpose than Bitcoin. So, neat side effect, but also kind of a drastic change for someone just changing the meta of the game on the guy. Changing the meta of a game can be good. We see it all the time. You just have to make sure you're balancing the game. It keeps the game fresh. It keeps players coming back and trying new things. But the key part here is you got to keep that dialogue going. Riot Games is so good at this. When they do this with League of Legends, they do this on a monthly basis. It's a scheduled release. They have buffs for characters. They kind of nerf some stuff sometimes. They add new content. But that became a part of the game for the gamers, waiting for that update, kind of anticipating what might be in that update. It's a big difference, and it opens this line of dialogue between the game publishers and gamers that kind of hasn't really existed. Even though it's almost a one-way communication, it does feel like a two-way communication. Because without community, there's no trust. Right? You have communities in games already. They exist on Reddit, and they're fine, but that communication to the game publisher is a different kind of thing. Gamers are way more forgiving and hopeful than your average DeFi person. I can say that from experience, and if anyone here has ever been a fan of an Electronic Arts game, you probably know that from experience too. There's not a lot of community and not a lot of trust. Battlefield 2042 was a real disappointment for me. But I am still hopeful that there will be a better next iteration of that. I'm way more forgiving than an average DeFi person would be, and that's great. You get a lot more flexibility when doing this kind of community stuff with gamers. How much stuff should be on-chain? Everyone just says, oh, hybrid, off-chain, on-chain. That's an ocean of options. If you have all of your assets on-chain, it really looks like pay-to-play. That's a real tough thing. If you have all of your assets off-chain, you don't have all that transparency that you could have with your gamers, which should exist. I didn't say up here it's a lame response, but it does depend on the game. We mentioned before with like EVE Online starting a new game. Like, that is an option, right? Just like, let's build a new game designed around Web3. But there's also games in the past that have changed just the mechanics of the game to kind of make it a new thing. Fortnite started as a co-op zombie shooter, and then they saw the Battle Royale mode from PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, pulled it into their game, and now look at the thing. So there are ways to tweak a game that exists. I would say that depends on the popularity of the game. They were able to get away with that because basically they had a dying game on their hands. When you think about bringing stuff into the Web3 realm that exists in your game, what you're really asking is, what stuff in my game do I want to open up to market forces that are outside of my control? Skins and cosmetics are by far the easiest. They don't really affect gameplay at all. But not all assets make sense. If it affects gameplay, you're going to risk that pay-to-play thing, especially if they're all minted ahead of time, or maybe someone has purchased up all those assets in the game, so the only way to get it is to go through a marketplace like that. That is very off-putting for your typical gamer. So you could do too much too soon and kind of put people off. But if you start with small, important stuff, or the least important stuff, I should say, you can go pretty far with that. If I take the RPG example, let's say you have armor. Shoes, pants, torso, helmet. Let's say you just open up the footwear part of that, like just the shoes part of armor, and you allow people to mint that and claim it as ownership if you want to. It could be something as simple as that. Now, what we typically see right now is you mint ahead of time, someone gets that asset, or it gets minted in real time in the game. But there's another option that no one ever really talks about, which is, what if you just minted the item when someone wanted that, like, not my keys, not my crypto vibe, like, I want to take ownership so that you can't take it back from me? If you did that, but you removed it from the game when you minted it, you now have two worlds. The asset either exists in the Web3 world or it exists in the game world. If it exists in the game world, you bring it back in, it basically needs to be staked for a set period of time, so you can't just constantly pull it in and out of the game. It's just a different idea. There's nothing radical. Anyone could have thought of this, but like it's an interesting way that you can take an existing game and try to slowly dip your toes into the water of bringing Web3 assets into the game for gamers, not for people who are trying to day trade these NFTs. That's kind of the key difference. This was interesting. If you look at the lifetime value of a player, now I know these games are not similar, especially the latter two are different from League of Legends. League of Legends has a ton of players, but they also, they also make a ton of money every year, but it breaks down to not a lot of money per player. EVE Online has 6,000 active monthly players, but they make 60 million a year. 60 million sounds like a lot less than 1.3 billion a year, but when you look at per player, that's a really different metric. And I had to look into that. I went on Reddit to see how much people actually spend on that game, and that's accurate. It's a lot of money. It just goes to show that these latter two games, they have large economies in their games themselves. So there's a lot more to do when you buy in-game assets or buy currency in the game to sort of do more with the game, whereas League of Legends is more about skins and cosmetics and less about economies. So mods have taken us really far with games over the last 2 decades. You know, we had StarCraft, and then Dota, and then Valve came in and made Dota 2, and then we had Riot Games create League of Legends off on their own. But you know, Blizzard, who created StarCraft, is not capitalizing on any of that revenue. We have been seeing all these great world-building tools change over time. At the Game Developers Conference, and a couple months ago, we saw that Fortnite Builder come out. That's going to be a big game changer, no pun intended. The Unreal 5.2 procedural generation kind of got overshadowed by that, but it allows people to build environments in Unreal way faster than they used to be able to. It would take days or weeks. Now is on the order of hours. So now we're starting to think about, okay, well, if building the world is so easy, but balancing a game is really hard, how do we solve that? We definitely want more early access people testing these games. We think that's a big part of what we do at Merit Circle, and it's a big part of that network effect anyway. Like, they're part of the network, do some work for the network. There's this ridiculous idea, I shouldn't say ridiculous, and maybe it's a little kooky, but this maybe future idea of having smart contracts that are extensible and moddable, that are meant for RPG games, or maybe meant for card games, so that when someone does build one of these worlds, they can take the economics rules engine off the shelf and bring it into their game. I say that very hand-wavy because who knows what that will look like, but it is a potential future. It's worth pointing out that speculators don't even like NFTs. Like, they don't care about the game. They're not gamers. They care about the value of the NFTs. That's like a day trader. That is one of the reasons why gamers don't like that stuff in their games. It's just a different kind of audience, and these speculators aren't even using those NFTs for the games. So I think that there is a new target we need to go after, these builders of the future, the in-game players, the builders. And when I say that is, like, there are aspects of these games that are already small economies. A merchant that sells, I don't know, armor and bullets, or it's a casino like in EVE Online. Those things already run like businesses in these games, but that could be an asset on its own to allow someone to run that as an actual business. Maybe they do sponsorship tie-ins, maybe advertising tie-ins, maybe they have to bring other players in the game to help them run that operation. This already does happen in EVE Online. If it's failing, you just let those market forces apply. Let it be a governance vote. Let someone else take over that merchant shop or that casino. Let someone get voted out and then have someone else voted in. These little in-game businesses exist already in games. It's just a new asset that you can open up as opposed to minting footwear, that kind of thing. So in 2013, Ethereum was created with this intent of general purpose, right? I mentioned that a moment ago, and that's great. It brought us really far in 10 years. There's a lot of general purpose blockchains right now. I don't want to do that. We don't want to build that. We're building a subnet called Beam on Avalanche, and it will be opinionated for the sake of gaming. It is targeted at gaming. It is not meant to be general purpose. Why are we building a subnet? There's a bunch of reasons that would go on for slide after slide, so I try to keep it as concise as I could. We can do fee config changes after the fact. That gives us a lot of flexibility. We can use proof of stake mechanics, which Avalanche calls the elastic subnet. But the most important one is that we can whitelist trusted partners to deploy contracts. That significantly reduces the security footprint, but it also allows us to be really innovative in what we do with smart contracts. Most smart contracts that you deal with today have extra code in them to deal with bad actors or exploits, but it's at the code level because you can't trust who's going to call that contract or who else is going to be on that chain. Well, if that gets removed, you can do a lot more interesting things at the contract level because a lot of those things aren't enforced at the protocol level. So we're going to play with that. Post-launch, that'll be all voted on by the DAO. We don't want to be in total control of that. I do believe that in the future, what we're seeing, like kind of like what we saw with Shrapnel, like every large game anyway, will probably have its own chain. They're going to have their own token and their own way of operating it, which just makes a lot of sense from an economic standpoint. It doesn't make sense today. It's a lot of overhead to do that. And if you saw that Shrapnel talk yesterday, where he showed all the pieces they built for GameBridge, then you'll understand why. But I do think that having all these games as subnets, if they were going to run their own chain, would be just an obvious thing for the ecosystem thanks to AWM. Warp messaging allows us to do arbitrary messaging across subnets without having to deal with a bridge. Well, that makes some pretty interesting ecosystem plays in between games, or maybe a chain that's just supporting operations or smart contract ability. Like, there's a lot of neat things we can do there. Also, the last one, Avalanche consensus, is it's just great. So that's a very easy choice for us. I'll wrap it up, and I'll try to get you guys out of here a little early. We'll go back to the dialogue piece. This is, in my mind, the most low-hanging fruit. Instead of minting assets, if you really want to build that community of people who are willing to pay a lot of money over time, give them that voice. Give them an ability to vote. Give them a way to have an impact on the game today that is open, honest, and transparent, and it doesn't cost them a cent. This is the new dialogue. This is how this will be the new patches kind of thing. What are we going to buff? What are the new heroes we're going to buff? What are we going to change? What are we going to drop? Let's let players have some kind of agency and vote on that. That's pretty much it. I'll wrap it up there because I know the last one went over and probably some of you guys want to get out of here. So if you want any more about this, you want to talk about some stuff, have any questions, we got a question right there. I'll take one right now. Do you want to just project or do you want to like get a mic or how do you want to do it? Okay, one question, then I'll let you guys go.
Hi. In your opinion, what are...
Yeah, you're good.
Hello, hello. In your opinion, what are the hurdles towards a world where I'll be able to lend my Cristiano Ronaldo from FIFA Ultimate Team to eventually get a loan on GTA 5, for example? What do you think are the hurdles, both from a, maybe not so much from a technical standpoint, but more from a corporate standpoint, where you're interacting with two different companies? Do you think the teams within these companies are currently thinking this way, or not really?
No, I don't think that a lot of teams are thinking that way. That is an interesting impact, right? If you take something out, you're loaning it, you're thinking about it more like a DeFi asset, it has a totally different impact on the game. That's one of the reasons why I had mentioned a moment ago that if you mint something in-game and then remove it from the game, then it no longer is impacting the gameplay in the way that it would be before. So loaning something out is a really interesting concept. Actually, we talked about EVE Online and how it's an unregulated market. In EVE Online, you can loan someone your Titan, one of these big ships, and they don't have to give it back to you. They just usually do. But there's been plenty of stories where people don't, and these things cost like $5,000. It's a lot of money. How loans will affect games is going to be different per game. I don't even know if some games are going to want to do it or allow it, even if you, in some cases, you won't even be able to prevent it. So you do have to think about how that affects the game, but to your question, I don't think a lot of people are thinking about it today. And so this is, it's a really good point because what I've been saying all along is, hey, let's not focus on this DeFi thing. Let's focus on the gameplay aspect. But I don't want to ignore the DeFi thing either. It still exists. It's not going away. If you make better mechanics for your game where people don't necessarily want to loan it out, that's great. I actually wonder if in the future if these NFTs will even have so much value that you'll want to loan it out anyway. Right now we have a lot of NFTs that have incredibly high value, mostly due to that hype wave. In-game assets representing NFTs will probably inherently have lower value than your typical like Bored Ape would. So to answer your question shortly, I don't actually know, but people do need to think about it. Okay, I'll wrap it up there. If there's any other questions, I'll see you guys outside, and thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.